Prestige Media Group.
Don't you see that fire in my eyes? I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that I'm straight. See my hustle, see the grind. They could do whatever it takes to make sure I'm straight. Nigga, I'm gon' eat regardless. I'm gon' eat regardless. I'm gon' do whatever ever to make sure I eat regardless. Oh, yeah, oh, oh.
Y'all, part 2 here. Where we left off, I made the decision to go to Boston, Massachusetts and attend Berkley College of Music. Now, you know, it's funny, man, no matter where I went, even at that point, I was always so proud to be from Sherman, you know, but there was always something in me, no matter where I'm from, where I couldn't sit still. I was a globetrotter. I was always intrigued with the Harlem Globetrotters. I was always intrigued reading those expeditions of, you know, Lewis and Clark, the Moors, all these different people that would go around and travel and explore, you know, and so it was just in my spirit. Like my mama used to say, from the moment he could even walk in a walker, he was trying to run out the door. And that just kind of explains, you know, how I want to go out around the world and really discover my music and discover myself and discover the world, all that, and, you know, just all of that, man. So just think, you know, I went from Sherman, went to a private school in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas ran by monks, all dudes. Now I'm going to Boston, Massachusetts to the prestigious and world-renowned Berkley College of Music. Well, you know, a lot of brothers and sisters have been there before me and have been there when I went there. You know, I can name names like, you know, Quincy Jones. Johnn Mayer was my classmate, y'all. And the list goes on and on and on and on about how many people went to Berkeley. And my name was amongst all those people. And so I went up there, you know, moved to my first dorm, co-ed dorm, middle of the city, not one, just one glued in campus, but buildings around downtown Boston. That became my new reality, and I began to learn and dig deeper into not just my love for music, but who I was going to become in the music. My first great experience, you know, I could break Boston down into quick segments because, you know, I could go on and on with those stories. But the main ones is my first experience to really get, you know, to work with a bigger artist, like a famous artist. At the time when I first started Berkeley, you know, I auditioned for the Berkeley Gospel Choir. And believe it or not, even when I was in Sherman, I really didn't have a big background in gospel music. I was kind of self-taught. You know, my mother was Catholic, my father was Southern Baptist, but I lived with my mother. So, you know, most of my church experience was Catholic, which is very different from gospel. So my first real experience in gospel music and a gospel choir was in Boston under Dennis Montgomery, which I still believe is still there at Berkeley, teaching gospel music, one of the most killingest musicians I've ever met in my life. And LL Cool J had just came into town right when I got to school. And his people came and checked us out. And then they asked to pick a select few of us to go sing background for him at that time at the Monster Jam in Boston where the Celtics played. I believe, no, it wasn't the Boston Garden, it was right there, it was the Fleet Garden at the time. And so about 6 or 7 of us got chose to go sing background for LL. That was my first huge experience. And when I did that, man, let me tell you, man, they picked us up in these limo vans and we went right backstage. I got the full experience. And not only was us singing background for him, but it was also us in the backstage. So that at that same ticket, it was LL, it was Aaliyah, it was Genuine, Blackstreet, LSG with, you know, Gerald Levert, you know what I'm saying, Aaliyah, you know what I'm saying, Gerald Levert, Keith Sweat, and Johnny Gill, a dude at the time named Uncle Sam, Shaggy was there, I believe Buster was there. It was a big lineup, it was a monster jam, and we were just right there in the mix of it all, man. And I remember going up on that stage. That's the first time I've been in front of that many people, at least 30,000 plus people. And the screams and just the experience, I never experience screams that loud where it was even hard enough to hear my inner voice. That's the best way I can explain it. Just further confirmation, this is what I need to be doing. God had chose me to do it, so I had to just keep going forward. Fast forward, I entered a group. I auditioned to be in this R&B group because I was always big into the R&B groups. So I messed around and auditioned, and I made it. At the same time, shortly after, a friend of mine was the lead singer of this funk band called Soulster. And at the time, I'm still going to college, y'all. Don't get it twisted. Like, I'm still going to school for music. I'm learning music theory. I'm learning all these new things and trying to figure out where my major is going to be. So as I'm doing that, I'm doing all this as well. And I'm just moving and grooving, man. And then my partner, the leader of this funk band, is like, Jay, I'm about to have a baby back in Texas. And they need a lead singer, and they're going to go on tour next summer. Literally my first year of college. And you know, my eyes was like, oh man, but I'm in this R&B group. I just got in this R&B group, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, dog, I got to do this experience. I've never been on tour before. So I went ahead and agreed to going on tour with this group called Soulster. It was a very, underground tour where the bass player was from there. He pretty much set that whole thing up himself. And that was what the game plan was. But in the meanwhile, I had to tell this R&B group, like, hey, I got to go on this tour. And I know they had already had an itinerary for us of what they wanted us to do while in Boston for that summer. So either way, I was going to have to be away from home. So I messed around and told them I was going to take this tour, but when I come back, I'll be in the group. And they was like, okay, that's cool. We'll get some substitutes in the meanwhile. Who was my substitute, y'all? There was a brother named Lee Wilson. You can look him up. And then the other brother was Ryan Leslie. So Ryan Leslie, some of y'all know him. If you don't know him, look him up. Brilliant, talented musician, brilliant businessman. Till this day, Ryan ain't nothing to mess with. And he was my substitute for my first tour. So when I came back after the tour, I was turned out. We ain't gonna get into all that, but I had lived my rock and roll experience, the ups and downs and all the rounds of being on the road. Beautiful time. Came back to school, and the group had broke up. Egos, if you ever been in a group, man, egos can really blow it away no matter how talented it is. If everybody ain't on the same accord and they not playing team ball, it's gonna fall apart. Groups are tough. And so it already broke down. I was like, oh man. So, but I still was playing with that band. We had got tight at that point. So I still was playing with that band for a while. And then somebody reintroduced me to Ryan Leslie. This was my first independent label experience. They linked me and Ryan up. Ryan liked my drive. Ryan at that point he had graduated from Harvard at 16. So we both were only like freshly 19, 20 when we had met. And he had already graduated from Harvard and was working. He had already had a regular job. And he had already started up his label back then, which was Next Selection. And I soon became a part of Next Selection. That was my first venture. And then at the same time, let me tell y'all, I was grinding, y'all. At the same time I linked up with Ryan, I went ahead and got an internship at Universal Records. So I not only was, involved in an independent label at a young age, I also was interning the first thing Universal for MCA, for Artist Development Representation, and learning the business. Because the same dude that had told me, hey man, come substitute for me, he pulled me aside one day. He's like, look man, you're talented. You got that naturally. So why don't you focus on something that you don't know and go into business? So that's when I put the business hat on, and I decided at that point that my major was going to be music business. You know what I'm saying? And I fast forwarded, Ryan and I worked a lot. I still didn't know my sound at that point. I knew how to sing a whole bunch of other people's songs, but I didn't know what Josh's sound was. JT, whatever you wanted to call me, I didn't know what it was yet. So while I was with Ryan, eventually, we were floating around. Ryan's game was fierce, man. He at that time he didn't even have a studio. So back then it was floppy disk. So he'd mess around and go in the Guitar Center, and he would put the floppy disk in the keyboards, make his beat at the store. So that's how Ryan, if y'all don't know Ryan, Ryan started making beats with no equipment, little to no equipment, but he always was fly. That brother always was dressing up, man. Eventually, me and Ryan parted ways, and right as me and Ryan were parting ways, that's the first time him and my other associate I was with in Next Election named Corey Williams. He was under Motown as Latif. So it was me, Corey, and Ryan in Next Election. And Corey had won this contest in New York to open for a lot of big artists in the Apollo. That's the first time I had been to the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And I remember while we were there, Corey won the contest. He got to open for everybody. Destiny's Child, Wyclef, Nelly, Bow Wow, all these people in the Apollo. I remember, and I met all of them. And I never forget going down to the basement of the Apollo. There was Wyclef, and across the way there was Jay-Z. That's the first and only time I had met Jay this whole time. And I wasn't even hip to his music at that point, so I wasn't even intrigued to talk to that brother at the time. I just kind of gave him the "what's up" nod in the basement of the Apollo Theater. And so that was kind of like my last fizzled out experience with Ryan and Corey. You know, it was kind of my idea that they were really meshing at the time, and we just had, just not that I disrespected the hustle or anything. We just had difference of vibe and different vision, So we parted ways, and then right after I read into the next chapter, big chapter for me in Boston, which was the Three Kings. Three Kings was a group formed by a lot of people based out of Boston with Berkeley musicians. All of us were different places, but all the brothers, but they all had different cultural backgrounds. The Three Kings, the three leaders of the band, was a brother from Jamaica, a brother from the island of Cape Verde, and a brother from Bridgeport, Connecticut. So it was basically a mesh of like world music, hip hop, and reggae. And we hit, and I ended up being like the background singer / hype man for this group. I really vibed with these brothers, and they were very in their beginning stages, but something gave me that vibe that it was cool. So we messed around, and our little stunt, like, man, it was success overnight, man. We just blew Boston up, packing houses left and right, man. And then we started opening. Every time there was a big show in Boston, they were calling us, man. We opened for the Roots. We opened for Talib Kweli. We opened for Busta. We opened for Damian Marley. A lot of reggae greats. We opened for Pharrell at an all-girls college. That was wild. So we were in the mix, and everybody knew we were just going to skyrocket. Once again, egos in groups are a horrible thing, no matter what level you're on. And that was another project that kind of fizzled out early, but the beautiful thing about it was the experience. And in the midst of doing that project, I found my sound. And that's when my solo sound really came into play. Now I was JT and the Dirty Truth. I figured out what it was. From the funk, from all the experiences of all the shows, of the music that I grew up, my influences, here came JT and the Dirty Truth. And while I was in the Three Kings, I started even opening for them. Like I would do my set, JT and the Dirty Truth, and then I would go on the stage with them afterwards and sing background. So that's how I started my home lane at that point. My first band when I came out to Boston, I was at the Middle East in Cambridge, and my band at that point, and we reference it now, y'all gonna know some of these names. My first bass player for my first show was Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly now plays for the Roots. My first trumpet player was Christian Scott. Christian Scott is a very well-renowned jazz trumpeter, as we was just in the trumpet room earlier, for under Def Jam Jazz. Mateo Laboriel on guitar, Ricky Lumpkin on keys, my boy, they call him the Real Sing, Mark Robertson was singing background, Rashidra, who ended up doing really well in the theater world. Man, that band was fully packed, man. Dion on drums. And I went through quite a few band people, but I learned how to put a band together, and I consistently kept doing shows all up and down the East Coast with my band and just really forming what my sound was. And then I ended up having my daughter. In the midst of kind of the peak of my band, I kind of slowed down because my daughter was on her way. And that kind of slowed down my whole thing. And Three Kings fizzled out. So here I was, my vision, most cats that go to Berkeley, when they leave Berkeley, they tend to go to New York, they go to Atlanta, they go to LA, they go to the music meccas. But I knew that I was about to be a father, and my daughter's mother was from Boston, so I had to wrap my mind around, like, when I get done with school, I'm going to stay in Boston and still try to pursue my music, but I'm going to be a father. And I tell y'all this not as a sad story, I'm just telling you my testimony, because with time you realize you can get it wherever you want to get it. It's not where you at, it's where you at. And that's really what you got to understand. And so I stayed in Boston, but I still pursued my music. I still kept going off and on to my own pace and learning how to be a father, trying to balance home life with rock and roll life, learning and living and learning that, the ups and downs and all the rounds of that, man. And I did really well in Boston, man. But I was there, till 2014? And I feel like I had hit a glass ceiling. Man, I had worked with all the great hip-hop legends of Boston, shows up and down New York City, studios, videos, I can't even begin to tell y'all, you would lose your mind if I told you all the stories, man. But like, I really did it in Boston. This little country boy from the 903 went out there and really got in the mix and became one of Boston's best known musicians. But I felt like there was something else. I wasn't content with everything, even with all the things that God had let me experience and do. There was more to it. There was another level I had to reach. So at that point, I felt I was burnt out. I felt like I did everything from a hole in the wall to the garden, and I was like, this can't just be it. So a chick from home and me started talking. She started dabbling in music. Her name was April Turner. And April Turner and I started talking. We grew up together as kids, but April really started putting her hands trying to get into the music business. And she was like, Jay, why don't let's try to work together and, consider coming back down to Texas. And I was like, come back to Texas? I don't know. That's it.
And another one, ladies and gentlemen, presented to you by JTronius. Tossing and I'm turning, trying to figure out good, the bad's, ups and downs, what we're about. Why am I so confused? On the other hand, things are so cool. On the other